This lecture is an overview or an introduction of photosynthesis and respiration. And what we're going to be looking primarily in this unit is the concept of biological energy. And we'll be looking at such things as metabolism, catabolic, cellular respiration, ATP, product, reactant, etc. These are all common vocabulary terms that we'll be covering in this unit when we're talking about photosynthesis and respiration. And of course, energy is something that is needed for all different cellular activities, and the idea that metabolism encompasses all the chemical reactions involved in the capture, storage, and utilization of energy in a cell. The metabolic pathways that are simply a series of chemical reactions by which all energy is going to be transformed as biological molecules are changed into either simpler or built up into more complex forms. So there's two terms that you need to be aware of. One is called an anabolic reaction, which is where you actually build larger molecules, versus a catabolic reaction where you actually break things down into simpler forms. Photosynthesis and respiration deal with both of these concepts. So, molecular energy carriers. Your body needs a mechanism to turn your, like say, food, like your lunch, into some kind of an energy carrying compound. The most common energy carrying compound in biological organisms is ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. Yes, you do need to know what ATP stands for and be able to spell out adenosine triphosphate. ATP is going to be found in both cellular respiration and photosynthesis. But there are other energy-carrying compounds that we need to note. And the two other energy-carrying compounds are NADPH, which is used primarily in photosynthesis, and NADH, which is used primarily in cellular respiration. So, the question is, what are NADPH and NADH? So your assignment, and this will actually be checkpoint number 1 on OneNote and in Summit, is to do some research on what these two energy carrying compounds are, what are they used for, what process are they found in, etc. Do remember that you need to tell me what the N stands for, the A stands for. In other words, what do we get this acronym NADPH? What does it actually stand for? So let's look at these two important metabolic pathways. And this illustration here is a good one. In one side of the illustration, where we have plants producing oxygen and the animals take in the oxygen, and the animal is going to break down sugar molecules, that is referred to as photosynthesis. And similarly, we will see cellular respiration on the other side, represented by the red arrows, where the animal is going to release carbon dioxide, plant takes it in, and produces a form of sugar called glucose, which is a monosaccharide. So, types of cells where we will find photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis occurs only in green plants, based upon the fact that we need to have these nice little structures here called chlorophyll. So here's a typical plant cell. You can see the nice cell wall, gives it that kind of squared off shape with the organelles inside called chloroplast, and that's where photosynthesis will occur. Cellular respiration, of course, occurs in all cell types, whether it be plant or animal, and it'll occur inside the structures referred to as the mitochondria. So here's a microphotograph of a cell. You can see the mitochondria right here. There's two of them. Of course, you can see the larger structure here called the nucleus, etc. So, organelles, photosynthesis is of course going to occur in the chloroplast. We'll be looking in great detail here about the structure of the chloroplast, the different parts of the chloroplast, the fact that the chloroplast may have actually been an independent living cell at one time that invaded a larger cell. And of course, cellular respiration is going to occur inside this structure here called the mitochondria. Very similar. They have a lot of similar characteristics, but differences. And their function and roles are different. So we'll be looking in great detail at both of these. When does these different processes occur? Well, photosynthesis is going to, of course, occur during daylight hours because light energy is necessary for it to run the system. It's the energy that is needed to be input in order for this to occur. And it could be natural light or artificial light. If you've looked around my room, I have quite a few artificial lights running to produce photosynthesis. Whereas respiration can occur at all times of the day. It is independent of sunlight, and it'll run based upon an energy source that is actually produced in photosynthesis, and that's a carbohydrate. The reactants simply refer to in chemistry as the ingredients. What do you need to start with? I always think of them as the list of ingredients in a recipe. For photosynthesis, the reactants are going to be carbon dioxide, water, and in cellular respiration, it will be a simple sugar called glucose and oxygen. Those are what you need to start the reaction. Photosynthesis will also need an energy source, and that would be in the form of sunlight. Products refer to what do you end with. So what we end with in photosynthesis is the sugar glucose, and in cellular respiration, what we end with is a chemical energy in a chemical compound called ATP. It's the primary ending point for cellular respiration. Waste products, these are called byproducts. They're also on the product side because it's what we end with, but they're actually considered waste. In photosynthesis, oxygen is the waste product. Whereas cellular respiration, the waste product is carbon dioxide and water, which, if you've noticed, is also the reactants for the opposite. So carbon dioxide, water are reactants for photosynthesis, whereas oxygen is a reactant for cellular respiration. So one person's waste is another person's ingredient. Okay, so there's a cyclic relationship between the two here in terms of when I produce waste, mitochondria is producing carbon dioxide as waste, but the chloroplast would have to have it, and vice versa. The process here, photosynthesis, is a constructive process referred to as an anabolic process, whereas cellular respiration is going to be referred to as a destructive process or a catabolic process where you break things down. What photosynthesis primarily is building is a simple sugar, a monosaccharide called glucose, that will be used by cellular respiration to actually be broken down into its parts to release and form an energy-containing compound called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay. Chemically, you should know this, by the way, this should be from sophomore biology, that in photosynthesis, the chemical equation would be carbon dioxide plus water, and in the presence of sunlight, will produce this carbohydrate called glucose, which is C6H12O6, and a byproduct called oxygen. This is what I call the middle school version. In cellular respiration, it's actually the reverse, where you're going to take glucose in the presence of oxygen. Anytime you have oxygen in a chemical reaction as a reactant, you're actually burning it, and you will produce byproducts of carbon dioxide, water, and the main product that you want here is this energy-containing compound called ATP, and you actually produce 38 units of it. And again, this is the middle school version of both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. In the future lectures that we talk about, we'll get into much more detail about what these two processes are and the fact that they aren't actually this simple. There's multiple stages to get through to produce the end products here of glucose and oxygen for photosynthesis and ATP for cellular respiration. So photosynthesis, here we're making energy and we're storing it in a chemical compound called a carbohydrate. And in cellular respiration, we're releasing that stored energy in the carbohydrate to be utilized for whatever processes the body and cells need to do. Finally, I'll include this in this lecture, but on checkpoint number 5, which will be this diagram that you picked up off the front counter, this is the color code pattern that for the mitochondria or mitochondrion, that means just one single mitochondria, multiple. This structure, when you color it according to the color code key, can only be of variations of red or orange, whereas the chloroplast here, when you go to color it, it can be in variations of greens or yellows. So that you should have picked up on day 1, and it'll be found in checkpoint number 5 in your OneNote is where you'll insert the colored diagram as a photograph and then submit it to me on Summit. So that's our preview of photosynthesis and cellular respiration.